What did you get from Peter Thiel?
uh, so just the way he looks at um, like the way he looks at competition, I think is a big thing. It's like um, because everyone it's going back to something we talked about earlier. You would think that these things are true because they make kind of intuitive sense until you realize that of course they don't make sense. Like everyone thinks, oh, I'm going to get into business, I'm going to compete with these guys, and I'm going to work my way up and stuff like that. And it's like, no, that's stupid. Why would you want to compete? A competition trap just like it it stifles the profit, and you want to be able to get to a monopoly state. I'm like, oh yeah, of course. Like from a business standpoint, why would you want to compete with anyone? I don't want to have competitors. So just shaping the way you look at things of like, okay, can I escape the competition trap? Is this a monopolistic idea or is it a service business? Like, do I really want to put all the work into it if the potential for, the growth, the valuation of the company is 10 or 20 million, or do I want to try to pick something in a different industry where the potential valuation is, 10 billion? I mean, just the way he looks at it from that, it's very rigid. It's very well defined. And I appreciate that because that's kind of how my mind works. I'm kind of black and white. It's either this or it's that. And it's just right or wrong, if whatever the case is. There's not a whole lot of gray in the middle. So I appreciated that part of reading his work.
Yeah, there's something actually very Teal-esque about you in terms of he looks for a secret. That's what he's always looking for. He's trying to, his famous question is, what is something that you believe to be true that other people would think is crazy? And nested within that is some kind of secret, some kind of special insight that you have about the world. And yours is, one of them at least, is that there's basically all of this information out there that pitchers aren't using. And, I think that one of the ways that progress actually emerges in the world is when something goes from being not understandable to being very understandable extremely fast. Let me give you an example. Take something like Uber. I remember when I was in high school, I waited like 45 minutes for a taxi that never came, and I was pissed off. I was furious. And I called the taxi company at the time and I said, "Hey, where is my cab?" And they said, "Oh, we have no idea." And then in the snap of a finger, 2, 3 years, all of a sudden Uber's everywhere. And Uber headquarters has a direct map of where all the Ubers are, and they can merge that with some kind of heat map of where all the people who want Ubers also are. So they can look at music festivals, they can look at sporting events, they can look at places that might be particularly popular with restaurants. And then all of a sudden you go from a place where we have no idea where the cab is to, hey, we can match you, we can pair you, and we have tons of visibility
Yeah.
into
Now you
what's
pull up
going
your
on.
phone and you're like, oh, I see. He's right here on the map. He'll be in
Exactly.
2 minutes.
Right. And so
Yeah.
for you, we are talking about this earlier, right? Humans see it, say, 30 frames per second. All of a sudden, you can see it thousands of frames per second. And then what's something that is, I guess, in some way we see in in 3 dimensions, but it's for the purpose of this conversation, it's kind of 2 dimensional. And what you can do is you can pop into 3 dimensions, right? You can rotate, you can actually look at numerically what's happening in the body, see what's happening from all these different angles based on cameras. And that's actually a very Teal-esque secret that you have.
Yeah, the way I interpret that side of things, I try to look to the future and I say, okay, like what is so I'll give a baseball example to illustrate this. If you take the best player, the best pitcher from 2000, and you put him into today's game, what does that look like? What is he? Is he good? Is he the best? Like back then, it was like Mark Pryor, right? It was Kerry Wood, it was Pedro Martinez, and it's like, okay, Mark Pryor was 94, 95. He had a good breaking ball. Probably objectively right now is it may not be the best. Who knows? It was good. He had a huge strike zone, and he was the best. You put that a 94, 95 starter with one breaking ball, not really a third pitch that like didn't have the greatest command into today's game, and he's like a three starter or a four starter. You know, maybe a bullpen guy. But the human genome didn't change. Like we didn't change as humans in the past 20 years. So the question then becomes, how do you take Mark Pryor So Mark Pryor went from being elite 20 years ago to being, let's say, he would be an average pitcher today, but nothing changed. So how do you take the average players of today and make them like the best player of today? What's the difference between Mike Trout and your run-of-the-mill outfielder? Uh, because humans are capable, clearly, of doing what Mike Trout does. Because in 20 years, if you just play this out the way it goes, it'd probably be less than 20 years, honestly, because technology just advances and accelerates. But you play this out, and it's like, okay, in 20 years, Mike Trout will be an average player, like, or would be. Mike Trout now would be an average player in 20 years. So how do you get all the average players now to be Mike Trout's ability level? Is it strength and conditioning? Is it nutrition? Is it knowledge and understanding? Is it biomechanics? Is it, and you just go down the line. And so again, it's the start point and the end point. Well, you start with your average player, and your end point is Mike Trout, and you look at, how do I close the gap between all of these different skill sets that Mike has? How do I close the gap in power? How do I close the gap in defensive ability? And let's create systems by which we can train the average player to be able to do those things, because that's where it's going. So then that creates the secret, right? It's like, oh, I can see in, right now what's going on is this thing, and so that's going to carry the next 3 to 5 years as teams figure it out, as players start to just dive into that and understand it. Well, there's these other 4 or 5 things that are going to come after that, right? Like, we found out in middle 20 teens that velocity was important, because we had pitch FX, and we could start measuring how fast everyone actually threw in one database, where we could compare and run some regressions on it. Then we figured out that velocity itself wasn't the only thing for a fastball. You have to have movement profile. So that ushered in the pitch design era, which we're still in the super beginning of. Not all teams even have high-speed cameras. Not all teams understand pitch design and how to actually train it and stuff like that. You have teams that are actively fighting against it and refuse to let players use data like that. So we're still in the beginning stages of the pitch design. But then the next progression is like, okay, well, now you have a fastball and you have another pitch. Well, what do you do with it? How do you be consistent every day? How do you stay healthy? How do you, like, all these different things that no one is addressing directly yet, because they're still kind of on the lower hanging fruit. And so those become my secrets. I'm like, okay, I see the future. In 10 years, people will be worried about this. Let me build infrastructure to handle that, so that I'm the one that they're coming to when they start worrying about that. I did this, with the camera. I saw it, like, Driveline built the infrastructure around the Edgertronic camera. And even though I was the one that introduced the camera to Driveline, they had the infrastructure to capitalize on it. And now they're known, and they've ushered in the pitch design era. And that's one of the things they're really known for. I was the one that developed a lot of that functionality, but I didn't have the infrastructure to capitalize on it personally. And so that's one of the things that I'm looking to do right now in the business world, is to create those infrastructures, so that when those revolutions come along, I'm the one that's leading it, and from a public facing standpoint.